So the first one is Anguttara 1059, and that is Pabbaja Sutta, and it goes by the Buddha addressing the monks, telling them basically how they should train. It says, therefore, monks, this is how you should train. Our mind will be made familiar with going forth as it is, literally, the isness of going forth, and arisen harmful, unskilled states will not seize and take over the mind. Our mind will be made familiar with the perception of impermanence. Our mind will be made familiar with the perception of not self. Our mind will be made familiar with the perception of the unattractive. And our mind will be made familiar with the perception of drawback, danger. Then furthermore, having known the evenness and unevenness of the world, our mind will be made familiar with that perception. Having known the world's coming to be and its uncoming to be, I stuck with kind of a more, well, as literal as possible translation, which is bhava vibhava, being and non-being. Our mind will be made familiar with that perception. Having known the world's arising and its fading away, fading out, our mind will be made familiar with that perception. Then he goes to say, our mind will be made familiar with the perception of abandoning or relinquishment. And then our mind will be made familiar with the perception of fading out, dispassion, viraga. And the final one is our mind will be made familiar with the perception of cessation. So this is how the monks should train. Then the Buddha repeats that the monk who trains in these 10 perceptions, he can expect one of the two fruits, knowledge and realization in this very life, i.e. full enlightenment, or if there is residue left of some unspecified, too subtle appropriations, he will realize the fruits of non-returning. So, if we go back to the beginning, so the very first one, it's kind of obvious, often repeated in other suttas, but it's something that I think because it's obvious, people would tend to fairly often overlook, which is reminding yourself of the values that made you want to practice in the first place. So remind yourself with your own going forth as it is. Because if you don't forget your own reasons, like your own aspirations, why you want to practice, why you're committed to the practice, why you're keeping the precepts, why you're doing everything you're doing for the sake of practice, then any unskillful, harmful mental states that arise, they won't be able to, well, completely throw you off the balance, completely overwhelm the right context. It's when people take for granted and kind of forget, drift away from their own reasons because of which they were practicing. That's how these unwholesome states come, and person tolerates them, acts out of them, and so on. But if that person were to remind themselves of their own values that brought them there at where they are in terms of practice, the contradiction between their acts of harmful acts coming out of harmful mental states and their values would be too big to ignore. So it's through ignoring your values that contradiction is being tolerated, and that's when people act unskillfully, unwholesomely, even while deep down, or in the broader sense, they still very much value their own practice and freedom from suffering and everything that the Buddha said. But then every now and then when unskilled states pressure you, you sort of give in, you forget, because you haven't been frequently bringing up the perceptions of your own values because of which you went forth or you committed to the practice one way or the other. So that's the kind of the very first step. It's really just to remind yourself of that, and not kind of, I remind myself and then I don't have to do it anymore because I know. No, the point is to go through that recollection of those things. So to make a point that yes, I know, but I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for the mind. I'm doing it for chitta. I'm doing it for the wild animal. I'm always reminding it of the same boundaries, of the same context. And if sometimes those remindings, those contemplations become, say, too mechanical, you're just slotting into the patterns of mantra-like repeating because you've been doing it every day. You have to stop that, and you have to like refresh it, so to speak. You have to make it alive. These contemplations are not just a impersonal, theoretical, mental exercise that you would just be going through the motions of thinking or reciting or visualizing. No, you need to feel. You need to feel your own reasons, your own responsibility for your own choice for practice, for following the Buddha's teaching or not. So when that's always kept alive, so to speak, and made kind of persistent as a context, as a broader context, then as the very passage, the same passage says, any arisen harmful, unskilled state cannot seize and take over the mind. So they can arise, they can pressure you, they can get closer and so on. But if the basic foundational values are something you frequently recollect upon, the mind, the animal, cannot be overwhelmed by those pressures, by those wild tendencies. So that's the first step, really. Then goes the same, like, the further refinement, it's okay, a perception of impermanence. So it's like, not just what you think impermanence is, but expanding, including everything, things that are dear to you, into perception of impermanence, so that impermanence is felt. Again, not just theorized. So that's when he said perception of impermanence. It refers to those levels, those personal levels that directly speak to the chitta, directly speak to the animal. So if you're just pondering about impermanence, like, that modern science is proven, quote unquote, that's not really the impermanence. The impermanence is that which you feel the weight of if it were to change. So you want to find things that evoke that, and then feed or present those perceptions to that wild animal at the right time, obviously. That's why we'll address it from the following suttas. Same goes with the not self, as in like non-ownership, it's not mine, cannot belong to me. Again, things that are, and you don't do it necessarily only when things like bother you, and then you just, again, like a mantra, just say, oh, it's not mine, it's not mine, so to just manage whatever's bothering you currently. No, you want to do it where nothing bothers you. You want to dig up things. You want to dig up your complacencies, your gratuitous layers of your identity, and so on. By the way, this whole thing obviously applies to somebody who is already a sotapanna. So if you're not, you got to work on seeing the mind. That doesn't mean that these perceptions cannot be relatable, but you need to understand that without having developed the right view, you are not seeing the animal correctly. You have no sense as to what the chitta is. You have ideas that might correspond to some degree or not, but you do not have the direct insight into the phenomenon of chitta and its characteristics. So that is an absolute prerequisite for all of these three suttas we're going to do today. So for somebody who's not sotapanna, of course, you still go through the same stuff. Just don't confuse it for the practice of a noble disciple. But you could certainly strive to emulate and do these practices of noble disciples as accurately as possible without deluding yourself into thinking what you're not. And that can actually reveal the chitta closer and so on. So you should still ponder on the perception of impermanence. You still ponder on the perception of not self, on the perception of unattractive, of the drawbacks and danger in ownership, in sensuality, and everything else. That is what would reveal the chitta. So the practice is not different. It's more like the reason why I keep repeating that it applies only to somebody who is sotapanna is because only the sotapanna or above sees their mind correctly. Because if you don't know that that is an absolute requirement for a successful correct practice on a correct level, then any idea you have or you develop on account of reading the suttas and listening to this ajahn or that ajahn, any idea you develop about impermanence, not self, unattractive, you think it's what impermanence is. You wouldn't be looking further because you think, well, it's clear. So now I'll just contemplate what's clear to me. But the measure of clarity begins when the mind is seen. So until then, any idea you have about values of going forth, impermanence, not self, unattractive, and so on, needs not to be taken for granted, mustn't be taken for granted. And that's enough to prevent you from being complacent. But it's very easy for people, because they become very familiar, to then overlook the fact that they don't even see the chitta. They're not sure what it is. Again, they have some ideas, but it's on the level of theory. There is no direct recognition and direct communication through the right means between you and your own wild animal. That is sottapatti, basically. So the second one is the evenness and the unevenness of the world. So people sometimes get confused with this. I remember even some translators, I think, say it's like justice or injustice in the world, which is absolutely ridiculous. Like, none of these perceptions have anything to do with objects of the world or the world itself. They all have to do with how they influence the mind. Well, when mind is presented with those perceptions, how does it react to them? So evenness and unevenness of the world literally just means like balance, imbalance, smoothness or roughness, whichever way you want to translate, referring to the phenomenon of the entire sense spheres, the entire domain, which is the world, your own body as the sense organs. So in the broader sense, not a specific this or that thing. So sometimes that the broader sense of your experience, the experience of the world in the widest possible context-wise, can be balanced, can be suitable, can be conducive, can be calming, can be like inspiring even. Sometimes it won't be. And that's not up to you. So the evenness and the unevenness of the world, it's pretty much on the level of bhava and vibhava of the world. It's pretty much on the level of coming and going, arising or fading away. So the reason why it's spoken of in these general terms is that's what these phenomena are. If you still think that the specific things in the world are the world, you are not seeing the influence of that broad context of the world, that influence that it has on the mind. So that's why sense restraint is necessary, virtue is necessary to move that threshold and withdraw from that dependence on specificity of your central object, central perception, central observations. And then the broader phenomena become apparent. And the broadest phenomena would be pretty much anything, the entire domain of external, which is what stands for the world. And sometimes, as I said, that might be smooth and agreeable and balanced, but you need to recognize, in the broadest sense, circumstances are fine, my mind mustn't get complacent. In regard to that level, in regard to that subtle, broad, almost invisible context for an untrained mind. Equally, when that equally broad world becomes uneven, becomes disturbing, becomes rough, whatever, whichever way it would be manifested specifically through the elements of this or that, or any sort of border, pressure, disturbance that comes from the width of that world, of that phenomenon of the world, same. Now I mustn't let my mind be affected by that. Because obviously somebody trains in regard to those broad, factual, real as such phenomena, perceptions of phenomena of the world. Anything inferior, as those suttas about kasinas, for example, as they say, anything inferior cannot disturb you. So any specific thing that comes on account of an even experience of the entire world, that you are obviously detached from sufficiently enough, anything specific that comes, that cannot bother you, because the framework remains complete detachment. Same, if you're already not bothered on account of the roughness and unevenness of the world, anything specific that attacks you here or there cannot disturb the mind any more than the broad world would have tried to disturb it, and the mind is immovable in regard to it. So it's kind of an upgrade of these perceptions of, that start on that immediate level, impermanence, not self, unattractive, danger. I mean, this is also on the immediate level. But in order to be discerning the actual phenomenon of the world without falling into abstraction or theory or trapped in a specified sense, that needs development, that needs refinement. So evenness, unevenness, coming to be, uncoming to be, pretty much if you train your mind in regard to the subtle higher perceptions, arahantship or non-return. There cannot be any lower fetters remaining, really. They would have been addressed with first, 4 perceptions. And the same goes, perception of abandoning, fading out is just this, again, for most people in the initial stage, those are abstractions. Cessation, letting go, just let go, almost like a poetic inspiration. But for somebody with the right view, who is seeing the mind correctly, who has been training that wild animal correctly on the right level, in that peripheral sphere, how we often talk about, thoughts of letting go are actually communicating letting go to the animal. For non-Sotapanna, they don't. They just communicate wishful thinking because they don't even have the animal there. So, thoughts of fading out, thoughts of dispassion, relinquishment, abandoning are actually speaking to the animal. So there is no more abstraction, there is no more separation, because the mind is made progressively more and more pliable, more and more obedient, more and more receptive to your own commands, to your own instructions. So that pretty much kind of sums up this sutta, which would sum up the entire training. So it's through feeding the right perceptions to the mind that has been rightly contained, through being established in virtue, established in sense restraint, which is what Sotapanna is, being correctly established, then the mind will have no asavas remaining if the whole thing is done successfully. And even if you fail to some degree, you'll be at least a non-returner, which is pretty good deal. So the second sutta is Sitibhava Sutta, which is a monk endowed with 6 qualities is incapable of realizing the unsupplied state of cooling, nibbana. So, which are the 6? Says, here monks, a monk at a time when the mind should be restrained or held back, he does not restrain it. At a time the mind should be released or let go or extended, he doesn't do that. He doesn't release it. He doesn't let go of it. He doesn't let it go. At a time when the mind should be gladdened or uplifted, he doesn't gladden or uplift it. At a time when the mind should be closely watched with equanimity, he doesn't do that. That person who doesn't do those things is the one who is inclined to the inferior, to the lower, and is the one who delights in identity and embodiment. So again, this refers to somebody who sees their mind. That is just so much taken for granted, but the suttas very clearly, or every time, outline the whole necessity of citta nimitta for Sotapatti, Sotapatti being identical to the establishment in virtue, sense restraint. On account of that, you discern the signs of mind, you withdraw from the dependence on the sense objects, and so on, through knowing your intentions, everything we talk about all the time. But see, even if somebody does that, yeah, they got the right view, they see the mind, but the mind still needs taming. Sure, you caught the animal, you fenced it off, you got the wild dog in, but it's still wild. Automatically won't be as wild as it was when it was allowed to roam freely before, but the tendencies of its wilderness and stuff are still there. So that's the training now. So that's what Buddha says, the one who doesn't invest effort in training this animal, doing the right training at the right time, releasing, restraining, gladdening, closely watching with neutrality, well, he's the one who still inclines towards the inferior, towards the sense objects, sense sensuality, sense spheres. So that's why he's not doing the training. And he's the one who still delights in identity. And whenever Sakaya is used, it has that sense of embodiment. So it's not Attavada, which is what differentiates a Putujana from a Sotapanna. That implicit, deeply kind of tacit, ingrained view that sense of self exists independent of your experience, your sense of self, which by default then projects it independent of the 5 aggregates. So that's the Putujana's view. Sotapanna would have abandoned that view, but he still very much has that sense of strong sense, or depending on how undeveloped he still is, can have a strong sense of I am that is inseparable from the body, from the senses. So it's always embodied in this form. That's why the Buddha often encouraged monks to be disgusted with their own body and contemplate and say, like a young man or a woman have a dead snake wrapped around their neck, wouldn't they be disgusted or repelled with that form? So that's how you should practice, to just undermine any lingering sense of that embodied identity, to put it that way. So, or as this sutta says, if you invest the time in training to restrain the wild animal that you caught when it's time to restrain it, to let it go when it's time to let it go, allow it to roam about a bit, to uplift it when it's time to uplift it, and to watch it with a neutral eye when it's time to do that, then you would be abandoning the inferior, and you would be uprooting, and you wouldn't be delighting in embodiment of your own, with your own senses and so on. So that's why the monk who hasn't basically abandoned these 6 qualities is still incapable of realizing nibbana. So he might stay sotapanna the whole life, but that's because he's not actually investing effort to train the animal. And that was the case of many householders who then, due to one reason or the other, returned back to the lay life, after the Buddha would have instructed them rightly, saw the citta, trained them, they got the right view, but then they were happy with that, and they were happy with the fact that their animal was seen, somewhat contained, free from peril in the future, and so on, but they didn't invest the further effort that could have been invested, and you could have finished the whole thing once and for all. So then obviously the rest of the sutta, the Buddha goes and repeats the opposite qualities, that where the monk does restrain, where he should restrain, and so on, and then he realizes nibbana as a result of it. There's nothing left for him to tame, because the citta, the animal, has been fully instructed, subdued, tamed, and then liberated. And the last sutta is the Nimitta Sutta, Anguttara 302, and says, so this is, the other suttas don't specify the higher mind training, but you could see that it pretty much goes in that direction. As I said, like the perception of evenness, unevenness, bhava, vibhava, already starts pertaining to these higher fetters. So that's already a form of adhicitta training. So this sutta specifically states that the monk who wants to develop that adhicitta training, the higher mind, so let alone reminding yourself why you became a monk and keeping those values and being established in precepts and virtue and sense restraint, seeing the basic citta nimitta and stuff, this is now, like, say you've been doing that for a while, and now you're entering a sphere of this subtler communication where, as I said, it's enough for you to think rightly about relinquishment, and the animal is getting that message. It's relinquishing. It's understanding you. You don't need to do more. So this sutta is for the monk who is devoted to such higher mind training, and there are 3 signs that he should often be brought, that he should bring to his mind from time to time. And you'll see that all these 3 signs are quite general phenomena. They're not specific things, because, as I said, when it comes to the adhicitta level of communication, specificity would have been abandoned a long time ago. You are now talking about general phenomena, accurate perceptions of general phenomena, real as such, which for most people that still depend on lower thresholds of specificity would be just abstract. It's just abstract theorizing. It does not stand for those phenomena. So the 3 the 3 signs, the 3 adhicitta nimitta that you can talk to your animal are, from time to time, the steadiness sign should be brought to mind, the energizing sign should be brought to mind, and the equanimity sign should be brought to mind. So if a monk who is devoted to the higher training exclusively brings his mind only the steadiness sign, then the mind would become sluggish. If he exclusively brings only the energizing sign, the mind would become agitated. And if he exclusively brings only the equanimity sign, then the mind will not become rightly composed, rightly balanced for the understanding, the exhaustion of the outflows, which basically means full correct understanding of the asavas, which is what really ends them. But when the monk is devoted to such higher mind training, and he brings from time to time the steadiness sign, the energizing sign, the equanimity sign, then his citta, his wild animal, ceases to be wild, becomes pliant, workable, bright, and not brittle. It becomes rightly composed for the exhaustion of the outflows. And then the Buddha gives a nice example of the goldsmith, who, if we were to only light coated with furnace mouth, having coated the furnace mouth, takes the gold with tongues and puts it into furnace mouth, having placed it there, at times heats it up, at times he sprinkles it with water, and at times watches it with equanimity. But if he only does only one of these things, the gold would either burn or be too hard or wouldn't mature. But when he does the right things at the right time, then that gold becomes completely pliable, clear of impurities, and then he can make anything he wants out of it. So that's the whole point of training the mind, because fundamentally the mind doesn't want to see the full extent of unknowability, the full extent of the peril of sensuality, the full extent of the dukkha, and you can't force it. You can get a wild dog, you can teach it tricks, and you can tame it to some extent, but deep down it's still going to remain somewhat an animal. And for those things to be seen on the level that results in arahantship, there mustn't be any part of that animal, any part of that chitta that is not turned towards it and accepting it and seeing through it. So if there is any holding back, means the gold is not entirely pliable. The mind has not been fully trained. And that's the point of this whole sutta, to explain that for those residues of cravings and asavas, the right things must be done at the right time. And that will then eventually bring that mind to full pliability. And then when you direct it towards the dukkha, towards the full understanding of freedom and so on, well, towards basically having it sink in what you would have understood as a sotapanna already, the way out of suffering, the full weight of that to sink in, the animal must actually have no reservations towards it, not holding back. Like those other suttas when the Buddha compared an elephant that's being ready for the battle, and then when he's seemingly trained, they would make him hold something in its trunk, and then they would poke it with spears and stuff to see if it's still gonna kind of flinch back and hide some parts of it, or not, or allow everything to be exposed because it's fearless. And it's exactly the same. So, and then he says, yeah, he can make any ornament, and it's same for the monk. So if he does if he brings the right signs at the right time, then whether he wishes, basically, if there is any opening for any of the superhuman knowledges, if he directs his mind towards that, the mind will get it, the mind will see it, the mind will understand it. Fundamentally, obviously, the most important one was when the monk realizes that his mind is fully pliable, he just directs his mind and says, may I, having realized the exhaustion of the old flows, enter and dwell in it. So not just, occasionally get a taste from it like a noble disciple would, but enter, dwell in it without mind ever returning from that state of coolness. So full dispassion. For that, as I said, the mind needs to be fully pliable. So that kind of concludes the 3 suttas. And let me now just go through some questions that I might not have addressed during this reading. So let's just see. I answered that. Yeah, so a question I got from a few people was what is the measure of this right time, right tune regarding this last sutta? And then also another question was really about people who are confused. How can you be overdoing upekkha? How can you be overdoing the equanimity? Because it just seems like if you look upon everything with equanimity, it would be fine. But really, when it comes to the adhicitta training, as the sutta says, when it says the perceptions the nimittas of steadying the animal, or the nimittas of letting it go, it's what I've been talking about in those examples of again, taming the animal, whether it's the elephant or the dog, whatever you're familiar with. The goal is to train it. So you got a wild animal. The goal is to train it. The goal is to make it listen to you, so that you don't have to keep the fences up, keep the alarms going on, keep the GPS trackers on and stuff, because it always escapes and stuff like that. So initially, of course, you need to trap the animal, like what the sutta says. He traps the elephant, and then elephant shits and pisses and screams and wants to kill everything that comes near it because it's tied to a strong post. But then it calms down. And when it calms down, that's when you start to approach it. So for somebody who hasn't been restrained, any form of restraint, especially when they hear about 8 precepts, their mind will be urinating and defecating and screaming at them to not do it. And they'll try to find any reason so that they don't have to do it and still pretend that they're practicing. But deep down, they know practice begins with trapping the animal. And for that, most of the animals won't be happy about, at least initially. But once that is done, you would realize, because initially when you hear that from the position of non-restraint, you think that the entire practice, all the way to Nibbana, is just about saying no to everything. It's just about tying the animal down and choking it down and keeping it down, and whenever it wants to move, you quickly restrain. But it's like, well, no, that would just asphyxiate the animal. You're still not going to train it. That is pretty much the self-mortification. So initially it might feel like that. You put that aside, put that fear aside, start doing it, and then you realize, okay, so the animal is not as wild, does not want to go as far. I need to let it move a bit. Within this confined, safe, say, fenced-off area, I need to let it move because I actually need to learn how to communicate to it, and it needs to learn how to listen to me. If all I'm doing is just keeping it down, then not even allowing it to walk on the leash, like the only message it's getting from me is no, 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 which means just it's not going to give up its resistance. It might be subdued and, lose the will to live, but it won't learn for itself. And that's the point. So when this sutta talks about, say somebody is not doing it that blindly anymore, recognizes there is a balance, there is space to move. If it's too tight, you loosen it. If it's too loose, you tighten it, and so on. The higher training, when it says you steady the mind when it needs steadying, you can think of it like you have your dog on a leash. It's already somewhat trained, but obviously it still has triggers. It still has tendencies, same like your mind does. So steadying the mind rightly would be, if say that dog wants to go at something, you pull the leash and the dog gets the message. Before you had to pull the leash and stomp on the leash and hold it down with your hands. Now it's not that bad, but you still got to hold the leash. Because again, deep down, there are tendencies in that animal that are not uprooted, and you would be foolish to completely trust it. So you hold the leash down when it's necessary. When the animal wants to go, you pull the leash, gets the message, sits down, but you hold the leash. The second example is how does the sutta say? So the second example, you energizing sign. So say the second example is the animal doesn't want to move. So he just doesn't want to move, doesn't want to go in the direction you know it should go, because again, these are the perceptions that it needs to become familiar with. Because in order to train the animal or your mind, yourself, out of your triggers, you need to, rightly, within the right environment, expose yourself to those things. Mentally, recognize the perceptions that you don't want to think about. Death, illness, sickness, aging, and so on. The perception of impermanence, like what the previous sutta said. So that requires effort because the animal will not willingly go there. Maybe occasionally, but generally you need to, no, come on, it's time to look at this. It's time to, go to the different aspects of the training. So you still hold the leash and you start to guide it. And then it goes. Then it's fine. If it starts, but if all you do is pull it with a leash wherever you want it to go, then it's going to become too agitated and it's going to go too far. And same, if all you're doing is holding the leash back whenever it wants to move, regardless of what it is moving towards, then it's going to become sluggish. It's going to lose its will to move towards anything. So that's like too much steadiness or too much energy. It's all measured by the state of the mind, not by what you think steadiness or energy is. And from that point of view, the equanimity, the sign of equanimity would be when the animal is neither too agitated, and literally you could think, I don't know if you ever trained a dog, but that's exactly when you would do it. When you know the dog is neither too agitated nor too kind of lazy or just shut down away from you because you've been sort of restraining it too much. When it's kind of there, listening to you with a degree of freedom, you let go of the leash. That's the equanimity part. So when it's rightly steadied, you let go of the leash. Because fundamentally, the point of the entire training is that animal starts to prefer the right things that you've been teaching it. That's when you will be liberated, animal will be liberated, and you will know that it's liberated. When you don't have to be fabricating it, doing it anymore through, controlling the leash and so on. And from that example, you can also see how it would be sometimes wrong time to do that. So if the animal is not quite balanced and you let go of the leash, well, it's going to run away into the directions it shouldn't, and then you have to undo that and bring it back and restart. So that's how it's not like too much equanimity, but it's more like at the wrong time. And same, if you're restraining the animal, steadying the leash, pulling it back, when it's not going into anything unwholesome, that's at the wrong time. You're applying the certain sign, well, the correct sign, but at the wrong time. If you're energizing it where it's already agitated and you are pulling it with the leash to move more, again, sure, it's a useful thing to do sometimes, but not at the wrong time. So from that point of view, you wouldn't want to just drop the leash every single time and hope that animal will do the right thing. No, you need to have developed everything beforehand, and then you know when there is like less risk. Same like with the drone, like, oh, I could try now. Because if it runs, it won't go too far, or this, I could let go of the leash now. Like, just let go of telling it anything and see where it goes. Because you would already be fairly familiar with its signs and features that indicate the directions of its intentions and behavior way before it even acts. Like, you get a dog, you never had any experience with training the animal, it would be, you need for it to like jump in rage to realize, oh, it's angry, let me pull it back. But the more familiar you become with the animal, with the dog, with its signs and features and little ticks and hints, you don't even like, you would just need to look at its eyes, for example, and already like, oh, it's wound up. If I let it now, it will go so far, it will probably attack something or somebody. And you could see the same with the mind. Initially, you needed like full swings between sensuality, intense cravings, ill will, hindrances. But as you start training the animal rightly, you don't even need to go that far to know that it would go that far. So, little position of the tail, posturing, the way it got up, the way it looks, it's like you already know where that would go. You apply the restraint, if that's what's called for. So if you have learned how to see those subtle signs, adhicitta level signs, the higher mind signs, then you would know even more accurately when it's the most safe to let go of the leash completely. And that's why that practice of equanimity as the third sign obviously requires that development of balance beforehand, like pretty much thoroughly. Of course, you could still make a mistake and let go of the leash for too long and then ignore the signs of the animal, but that's how you would yourself learn and become more and more accurate in training that animal. So it's recognizing the little mental inclinations of your own heart, of your own, that, as I said, the broad kind of evocative, emotional, the broadest phenomena, where it leans to way before the feeling would have even fully developed. And recognize, no, you don't go there. If it's nothing unwholesome, you can go there. If it's neutral, okay, we're going there, but together. So I will let you go there. I will even drop the leash if I'm confident in your balance. But obviously, I will walk with you. I'm not just letting you roam completely. And that's why I keep saying to people, practically speaking, that's why you always need to, well, the measure really of the right direction of the practice or the wrong direction of the practice is knowing your intentions in regard to everything and anything you want to do, and recognizing that there is never a compromise or the external allowance that would justify you not putting those intentions as the sole factor for deciding whether your entire projection of your forthcoming actions would be wholesome or unwholesome. So you could be doing what the whole world agrees you should do. If you are doing it from the intention that's rooted in either greed, aversion, distraction or any hindrance, it's unwholesome. It doesn't matter how it measures externally. And same, if the whole world agrees you shouldn't do something because, no, that's wrong, within the precepts, obviously, if your intention is correct within the precepts, then you know it's fine because I'm not doing it for the wrong reasons. And that's especially true when it comes to these views about what practice is and isn't. People, oh, you shouldn't do that. Everybody says, you can do this. But it's like, you could be doing the right things externally, but internally for the wrong reasons. And if no practice tells you that actually, yeah, you're going to start wrongly one way or the other. But if no practice tells you to start looking at your reasons as the decisive factor, your thoughts, your intentions, you're never going to get the practice kind of picking up on the right level. And that's the whole point of this training. The whole point of this taming would be that if you start recognizing your own inclinations, your own intentions, that is already what animal is seeing or pushing for, and that's already the message it's getting through to that animal. So you don't even, as I said, you don't even need to have the perceptions of sensuality or the perceptions of ill will or things like that would prompt you. You could already see slight inclinations on such and such day towards that or towards this, and you already know where it would lead. Whether you encounter the perceptions that will fuel it further or not, it's irrelevant. So that's why that recognition, you measure what you need to apply, not what you think your duty is to apply, but by what current inclinations, mood, that the most general sense, the feeling, heart is leaning towards. That's what your inclinations would be going towards. So by recognizing those inclinations, you're already recognizing the state of the animal. What is kind of urging you for, or pushing you towards for, or trying to get you to do it for it. So that's why that same recognition of your intentions kind of can be developed, certainly starts from the level of like a putujana, pretty much all the way up to arahantship, would be the knowledge of your intentions and the reasons behind your actions. Like, what thoughts have you been willingly accepting, fueling, inclining towards, that brought your mind to kind of lean in those directions even more. So as a householder or a monk, whenever you want to do this or that, you need to start looking at those peripheral reasons as to why I'm doing it. Well, I'm doing it because everybody says so. No, but why am I doing it here and now? Oh, I'm going to a monastery because everybody says that going to a monastery is a good thing. It's like, why am I doing it? Well, I'm doing it because, it's a big festival and there's going to be hundreds of people and I'll get to mingle and meet everybody and feel justified in socializing and abandoning my seclusion and enjoying company and talking every day for a few days, and it will all feel fine because it's, in the monastery, it's for the Dhamma, we're having a big festival and stuff. It's like, none of those reasons are wholesome. So you're doing it for very sensual reasons, reasons of hindrances, reasons of restlessness. All externally, everybody would be praising you for it. Wow, you were so helpful, you were there all the time and stuff. To the point that, I was saying that before to the monks, there's even that sutta where it says that Sotapanna would not become an arahant, would block his own progress basically by sleeping too much, working too much, talking too much. So not kind of restraining himself in regard to those things. And then the fourth reason would be getting engaged with dealing with like justifiable right Sangha issues. And then the Buddha said a monk who hasn't fulfilled his training should think thus, like when it comes to obviously not talk too much, not sleep too much, not work too much, as in like become completely distracted. But when it comes to the fourth one, so like there might be justifiable threats to the Sangha, to the Buddha Sasana, to this and that monks have to address, have to deal with, have to engage with. He would still think, hold on, there are monks that in this assembly that finish their work, they're arahants. Let them deal with it, because I still have the more important work to do. So even preventing, Sangha decline and whatnot was not a justification for abandoning the mental training that leads to arahantship. When you're an arahant, then you can do what you want. Because obviously there'll be certain things you will never be able to do again. Like in the suttas, like either deal with the Sangha or just go and roam around and talk to everybody and instruct the kings. Or like that other arahant, they just built a whole village for people that built his kuti and they were living off of his support because he was getting so much support, and he did the work. None of that was a distraction for him. But until that's the point that's developed, every intention matters. So you might say, well, again, this is a good thing to do. Why am I doing it? And if you start applying restraint, letting go, observing with neutrality on that level of intentions, you are getting on the level of adhicitta training. Because obviously, in order to get on that level, you would have had to be physically withdrawn, restrained, keeping the precepts for quite a bit of time. So any kind of wandering off in those coarsely unwholesome directions, there is a lot of space between. So you would see the animal way before it's full on in other people's pastures, so to speak. So that's why it's like the whole training of chitta is measured by the state of chitta, and the state of chitta is revealed through, well, obviously restraint, virtue, and then knowledge and constant reflection on your intentions, actions by body, speech, and mind, and mentally, like what thoughts do you choose to allow, welcome, delight in, so that they take hold of your mind even more. You can't prevent them from arising, as the first sutta says, but you could certainly make sure you don't lose the right context that keeps them in the context. And that's pretty much the definition of the training. Like, there's nothing else that you can do.